Hi, this is Chuck Martin. We're here at the AI Summit, and I'm happy to say joining me here is Tarv Nijjar, Global Senior Director of Customer Experience and Transformation at McDonald's. Welcome.
Thanks, Chuck. Great to be here.
Yeah, you gave a big keynote this morning. I've been hearing rave reviews about this all day. Tell me a bit about that.
Yeah, so it was starting off the day, honored to actually kick off such an amazing event. So I was really thinking over the last few weeks about how to do that. And rather than going right into the deep end, there's a lot of companies, from my experience, and a lot of companies that I've spoken to that are still on that journey to get going and really sometimes don't embrace change because that journey to get going, they fear is something that they don't understand. So it was more at the level of, what are the things that you've got to do to inspire change? How do you get your whole organization to get on that journey, and how do you do that thinking with a problem-first mindset to be able to work all the way through to delivering value as opposed to just trying to do AI for the sake of doing AI.
So how does a company the size of McDonald's, I mean, you're a huge global brand, how does that start?
Very good question. So, it all starts through focusing on what our customers want, but also what our crew wants as well, because we can't do anything without our restaurant teams, because the crew experience is the customer experience. And then you've got to look at things through the lens of desirability, viability, and feasibility. Desirability is how much do our customers want to go and solve that specific problem? And viability is, how complex is it from an existing process or data standardization point of view? And then feasibility, what's the cost implications to be able to do that? Really taking it through that process, you can quickly converge on the many, many problems, as you say, a large organization like McDonald's could start to focus on.
So you've got really two customer sets. You have your internal customers, people who work there, and then you've got the customers, people who purchase from you. Are those different in terms of how you approach it?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I don't know about you, but I think everybody's a McDonald's customer, so whether you're working for McDonald's, you're also thinking from the point of view of being a consumer as well, of consuming our delicious food. So yes, you do have to think about it technically from how can we take away some of the pressures that our restaurant team face in a time where obviously they're delivering delicious food that has that quality right the way throughout by creating some sort of efficiency by using AI. That's one way to think about it. And then looking at the customers, it's about how can we make processes more efficient to be able to give customers what they want and when they want it. And Chuck, yourself, it's changed. The way that we expect things years ago versus the way we expect things today is very different. And we played a video earlier on from David Barry from 1999 talking about the internet before such a time that the internet was relied upon as much as we rely upon it today, and how that's changed over the last 20 years or so. It's the same for how we think about what customers want today versus what customers wanted in the past, and making sure that we are aligning to those needs.
So with your two different customer sets, which one is tougher in terms of solving the solutions? A lot of companies, it's the internal issues that get in the way, it's not the customers outside.
Yeah, so there's actually, we call it a three-legged stool at McDonald's. So it's not just our customers, of course, we've also, our business, we are owner-operator led, so each individual McDonald's is owned by a franchisee or an owner-operator, so it's thinking about solving for their needs, it's thinking about solving the needs for their restaurant teams, and it's thinking about solving the needs for the customers. I wouldn't say, one is more hard than the rest, because I think one is linked to each other.
So do they care that it's artificial intelligence, or are they just looking for essentially easier way to do things?
Depends who they are, right? I mean, it's really about the clarity on what it is we're trying to do. So does an owner-operator want to get into the technical parts of how artificial intelligence is going to solve a specific problem? What's the algorithm? What's the accuracy levels? Some may do, but the majority will really look at, well, what's the value that's being delivered through doing that? So as long as anything you do can link to some sort of value, whether it's a value for you, Chuck, when you go to McDonald's and have a McDonald's experience as a customer, our restaurant teams when they're going to do their shift, or the managers at McDonald's, or our owner operators when they're obviously running their own individual family businesses.
So you're obviously the change agent at McDonald's. How does a company, not McDonald's, how does a big company get somebody like you to come in and say, hey, the world is really changing?
So I can't take all credit. I mean, I've got an amazing team that's all around the world that are doing amazing things, and it's really looking at what's going on externally as opposed to always just looking at what's happening internally. If we look at having a mindset that looks around everything, different industries. If you think about it, industries are also converging. Different companies are coming to play in different areas. If we can look at what's happening externally and come with an informed answer, then you'll have a bit of credibility behind what you're trying to do. And that's really important.
So we're in London now, obviously, and you're an extremely global brand. I mean, you're pretty much everywhere. Do you look at regions differently, or like where do you test something, proof of concept? Or you do that, or you just go live to scale?
So yeah, I mean, one amazing fact that I found out about McDonald's, you can try and visit a McDonald's every single day of your life. It will take you more than 100 years to visit every single McDonald's. That's the scale of the brand across 120 countries. And no, you can't just go big bang everywhere. So it's around looking at who are the markets that we want to look at trying different things with, doing proof of concepts with, doing, proving the value and then being able to scale from there. But there might be a bit of an 80-20 split where there might be some things which are absolutely local led. There's things, if we think about data, we have GDPR in countries in Europe, and that might not be the same in some other countries, just using that as one example, where there might be some transformations that we absolutely want to have a standardized way of looking at things across the globe.
So, and where are you based?
So currently I'm based in London. My whole team are based out of Chicago in our headquarters, but we'll be moving there as a family later in the year.
To Chicago?
To Chicago.
Oh, you're coming to my country.
To the Windy City, yes, we are.
I love it. So when you're in, say, the UK or in the US or in Asia, because the team is there, is it most logical to launch there, or do you actually look at whatever market is more pliable?
I mean, the first thing we've got to do, and I mentioned it this morning, is empathize. So empathize with your customers, empathize with your employees, and you've got to, when sitting in the center in a global role, you've got to empathize with the markets. Let's remember and not forget, even when you're trying to launch new initiatives and trying to launch transformations, the markets are still running these businesses on a day-to-day basis. So 80% of their time is probably looking at some of the supply constraints, some of the macroeconomic factors, some of the ways of how we go to market, which is very, very relevant to that market. So you've got to be empathetic to how do you prioritize based on the availability of each of the markets and then the results we can see coming out the other side versus the agility where in some markets it may take longer to do something, in some markets we may be able to do it faster. So
McDonald's has been around forever. You're relatively new at McDonald's. Tell me about your road there.
Sure, so 67 years McDonald's, so it's been a great journey, and obviously always been close to the brand growing up, from visiting McDonald's with my big brother and standing in the queue waiting for my Happy Meal and Happy Meal toy when I was a little boy and growing up. And I actually started my career in finance, then moved into investment banking, and then the last 13 years have actually been in CPG. So I worked in the local market for the first 4 years and then moved into global roles across strategy, finance, and then leading some of our digital transformations before moving on to lead artificial intelligence across the whole corporation. That really helped me to be able to understand not just what we're trying to do from the center, but understanding the needs and the challenges of the local market. Things happen for a reason. We had, an opportunity came about to go and lead this large transformation on how we look at transforming our customer experience across all the areas that I talked about. And I often joke, but it's true. After a few months of conversations across the whole corporation, across the system as we call it at McDonald's, I sat my 5-year-old down and sat my 3-year-old down, and we went, boys, what's it going to be now? Do you want Daddy to do candy, or do you want Daddy to do Happy Meals? And they both said Happy Meals, so we made the decision.
Simple decision, it sounds like. So where do you go from here? It sounds like you're not a techie, so to speak. You're more of a strategist. Is that what companies need today in terms of their AI implementation or deployment or thought process?
So my background's in computer science, so if we want to go and have a technical conversation, we can
handle it.
But, and I think that's the really important piece. You want to know enough to be dangerous, to have a conversation rather than being a functional expert in that area. It depends on what your objective is. You may want to be head of data science for a certain area which is specifically focused on the algorithms and models, and therefore you want to be, one of the best in that area. But really, if you want to try and think how that can help different functions within a business, you've got to be a generalist. You've got to look at how can it help supply chain, marketing, finance, and also as well, to your point about being a strategist, you've got to look at the short term and long term and mid-term view. So what are we doing Horizon 1, 2, and 3? If you can give that perspective and really take people on that journey, it's really helpful. But the most important part is you've got to be able to tell a story. And you've got to make it relevant to your audience. If you can do that, you can take them along on the journey. And it's better to get them on the bus at the start of the journey than try and get them on the bus at the end.
Right. So here at the summit, we actually have a whole quantum track. Clearly, artificial intelligence, quantum, they're emerging technologies. Because you're involved in looking at emerging technologies for the future of McDonald's, for example, do you have to look at quantum yet?
Yeah, I mean, dabbling in it, experimenting in it, just like some areas of artificial intelligence. I mean, even artificial intelligence, when we think about deep learning, people come over and say, oh, by the way, you've got to work with us because we're the experts in deep learning. And I'm like, great, let's set up a conversation. But what does that really mean? Are we doing something that is cutting edge, or are we just looking at doing very simple neural networks? And again, I bring it back to innovations will come. So we're talking about quantum computing, we're talking about artificial intelligence. There will be more down the line. The metaverse has been talked about in a very hot topic. Chuck, technically, if I just pivot to the metaverse, we've all been living in the metaverse during the pandemic. Version 1 of the metaverse, where we've been joining all those calls, through our virtual platform, whatever that might be. That's a real pure proof of concept of the metaverse, but essentially it is looking at a virtual way of looking at somebody else. So to answer your question, we're dabbling in all areas of innovation, but it's got to be linked to the problem that we're solving, and it's got to be linked to the value that we're delivering as a business.
So for the future of drive-thru at McDonald's, is AI going to be playing a role there?
For sure. We've looked at our customer journeys across every different part of how you would interact and visit McDonald's restaurants. And McDonald's restaurants today are not like they were traditionally, where the front door of a restaurant can now actually be your smartphone. So specifically within that, we're looking at moments of truth. When does Chuck consider going to McDonald's? When do you place an order at McDonald's? What are you doing when you're waiting to collect your food from McDonald's? And what are you doing then once you're consuming your delicious food from McDonald's? So back to your question, absolutely. We've already started to do automated order taking, where we can take some of the pressures off our crew and actually use natural language processing or other areas of AI to be able to do order taking, and then being able to obviously look at taking that through and helping the customers go on that journey. We've started that already in the US and doing some pilots where our head office is in Chicago, and I'm sure we'll be rolling that out in the future.
So with the extensive menu of McDonald's, are you going to be able to eventually, I drive up to McDonald's and I don't order, it actually knows what I should be getting and then puts in what I should be getting in the future, but I don't know it yet?
So, yeah, great question. Just back on the menu piece, I mean, in the last few years, we've actually relaunched our strategy as a business, and we've decided to, if you look at our strategy, commit to our core. So our core is, although across the world there's different menu items, it's really around beef, chicken, and coffee. That's the three areas from where we play and actually start to drive innovation and existing and new items. But the point you make, we've got to be careful. We've got to make sure that we are being ethical on how we know Chuck, and ensure that we have your permission as Chuck to know Chuck, to be able to know that. What's your favorite menu item at McDonald's, out of interest?
Oh, just pick one.
Pick one, okay. So next time you want to pick one, basically, if we know to already have that ready for you, essentially then we need to have your consent to know how to do that. However, if we have your consent to know that you like whatever that is that you like, maybe there's other relatable foods on our menu that we can suggest to you. And we're doing some of that, but not to the level of an individual basis, but more at an aggregated level on times of day or times of the year.
So everything changed during the pandemic, obviously. Is there anything now that is different that you do as a company because of the pandemic?
So, I mean, like you said earlier, I'm 6 months into my McDonald's journey. However, I think, one thing that's quite funny. I saw some images being shared around about digital transformation and what accelerated the digital transformation of any corporation. And it was A, your CIO, B, your CFO, and C, the pandemic. And it's obviously C, the pandemic. So I think acceleration is something all companies and in all industries have been able to embrace during a time that none of us had ever experienced before. There is a watch out there as well. I think the pandemic has also, created some things that we need to think about: well-being, mental health, and that's important because you've got to make sure that you are not just looking at the needs of your business and your customers, but making sure that you're looking at the needs of your employees and your teams as well.
So a year from now, we're sitting here having this conversation. What are we talking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. A year from now, I think we'll be still talking about some experiments in the area of quantum computing. I think we'll be talking a little bit more about how deep learning is being used to be able to improve. I'm talking about in the view of McDonald's, how deep learning is being used to be able to make the customer and crew experience better than it is today. And hopefully we'll be talking about what your favorite item is at McDonald's.
Well, you'll know.
Well, only if I've got your consent.
I look forward to our conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chuck. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise.